Okay, so we're going to learn some new Photoshop techniques today. We're going to learn about vibrance and saturation, the shadows and highlights, the healing brush, content-aware fill, and what's the third? Clone stamp. Okay? The first thing I want to show you is what you're going to care a lot about, which is making the color better, right? So this is the color assignment we're working on, so we want to make the color a little bit more intense. So how we do that is we come over here to our layers menu, and we come over here and we want to go to the word vibrance. Don't go to hue and saturation, go to vibrance. Okay, vibrance. Now when you click on that, you'll see that what comes up here is two sliders, the vibrance slider and the saturation slider. Now, the difference between them is the vibrance slider will make the colors a little bit more intense but very natural looking, where the saturation slider will make them look wacky if you go too far. Okay? So you just play and see which one works the best. So right now this is taken at sunrise. There's not a lot of color in it. I mean, there looks like you can see some sunrise stuff. But if I take the saturation up, let's say, so it all starts at 0, because I can take it way down and almost make it black and white. But if I go all the way up, then it looks totally wacky, right? And this is what I see a lot when I'm judging contests, that people go and they say, well, that looks really cool to have all that color in it, but does it really? You know, does this look natural anywhere in here? No, it's way too much. Okay, so let's get this back to 0. And let's do instead, and remember how to make the picture bigger or smaller, Control minus or Control plus. If I use vibrance and I go up, you can see that the colors are going to be more intense, but they're also going to look way more natural. Okay? And so sometimes you can use saturation and it does help the colors, and sometimes it goes too far when you do this. Right now, if I click this on and off, you can see that I have intensified the colors, but they look very natural, don't they? It just makes it look like probably my eyes saw that, which is because the camera doesn't shoot just like what my eyes see. So I can make it look way more accurate. Where if I do instead, and I do saturation, it's not always going to be that way, but many times. Let's say I come up here and I go super wacky. Okay? So now when I look at this, you can see that all the colors look whacked out. Okay? And we don't want that. We want it to look natural but good. So we're going to put this back to 0. And we're going to move this saturation up. Okay, somewhere, I mean the vibrance up, somewhere that looks good. Let me pull out another one and show you another one. So here's another one at sunrise again. Again, if I come up, let's get that back to 0, and that back, oops, that back to 0. How did that come up? Okay. So we have the vibrance and color on this one. And if I move the vibrance up, you can see that it's going to get richer and really pretty. Whereas if I come and I do the saturation, then it looks like it's a circus kind of colors. Neon and very strange. We don't want that kind of color. We want it to look natural as much as possible. So we're always going to try to get back to something that enhances the color but doesn't take away from the original scene. It just enhances the original scene. Okay? So that's what vibrance and saturation does. It can really enhance your color pictures. And you're doing color, so that's a cool kind of thing, right? So now, I also want to show you a couple other things. In this picture here, if I use Control plus to make it way bigger, you're going to see, or not, let's see what my other one is. Oops, I don't want that one either. All my little spots that were in here earlier seem to be gone. So let's see if we can get out of all this and get back to the original. Alright, so here's our original. And you see that there's spots in here. What are those spots that you guys see there? black spots right there and there? What are those? You guys see them? What are those spots? Anybody know? They're dirt on the sensor. Those are sensor spots. Okay, that means a dirty sensor. And so that happens fairly frequently that we have to get rid of those. There's a couple ways to do it. I'm going to show you the very easiest way to do it. So you know how to make this bigger or smaller. You make Control plus to make it bigger. Then you push your hand on the space bar and it turns into a hand, which allows you to move this around. So all over and look for those little sensor dust spots. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come on the tool palette here to the little tool that looks like a Band-Aid. And if I right click on that, I want to use the Spot Healing Brush. Spot Healing Brush. Now it turns into a brush. Anytime you see a circle on the cursor in Photoshop, it's called a brush. That means it has some different attributes that you can change on it. Up here in the upper left-hand corner is your brush menu, right here. You see this circle? If you click it down, you'll see that you can change the size of your brush. But I'm going to show you an easier and much better way to do it, and you can change the hardness of your brush. Now that's something we use a lot. So I'm going to show you. Right now it's on hard because that's the default for using the Spot Healing Brush. But if I want to change my brush, what I use on my keyboard is the bracket keys. They are right under the plus and minus keys. The right bracket keys makes your brush bigger. The left bracket keys makes it smaller. The way that Photoshop was intended to be used is to have your left hand on the keyboard and your right hand on the mouse. So if your left hand's on the keyboard, if you're right-handed, of course. If your left hand's on here, you can come and you can adjust the size of this, and with your right hand on the mouse, you can move it to where you want it. So we want it just a little bit bigger than the area we're trying to get rid of. So if you notice this, I want you to look up on the screen and see inside the circle. I'm going to click it, and that went away. So what Photoshop does is it determines what's in the circle that you don't want and what's around it that can fill that area. And that's what we're looking for. So right now it's going to click out of those. So you see that both of those were gone, right? So if you come back here, I just click it here and it's gone. Click it here and it's gone. So if I come around, I want to go on all parts of this because lots of times there's little spots that you see this little spot here. You want to click on that to get rid of that. You can come over and see if there's any more spots from the sensor because it's super annoying when you have them and it looks bad. Might be one there. One light one here. I'm going to start looking at your photos now and grading you on getting rid of those. Okay? Getting rid of those sensor spots as much as possible. So you're going to look through to make sure you've gotten them all. Now, that's to get rid of little small things. Okay? So you can even come in here on the rocks, and let's say that there's a piece of dirt on a rock. I can come in and I can just go like this and get rid of it. So if there's a white spot on a rock that I don't want, because I think it's drawing attention to it, I can also use that healing brush tool to get rid of some of those. Okay? So I can come all the way through this and figure out if there was trash down here or a bottle or something that I didn't want in the picture, I can get rid of those little spots. Okay? That's called the Spot Healing Brush, and it's just for little tiny things that you want to get rid of in the picture. So here now we have this picture that got rid of all of those spots that we don't want. Now you notice in the upper right hand corner here is a little black area from the camera lens shade, caught the edge of this picture. So there's another tool that's really cool. It's in Photoshop, I think Photoshop 5 and higher, and it's called Content Aware Fill. And it's one of the greatest secrets ever in photography. It's really, really cool. Now, you're going to come here and you're going to use this thing called the lasso tool. This little tool looks like a rope. If I hover over it, it says lasso tool. This is a selection tool. So if I come here, that means I can select any area in my picture just by drawing a circle around it, and I have to connect it back to there until I get what are called marching ants. These little spacey looking things, that dotted line that's moving, those are called marching ants. That tells you that you have a selection there. When you have a selection, it means you can isolate that area and do stuff to it. So let's say I want to adjust some things in this area. I can come up here to my image and adjustments, and I can go to, let's say, brightness and contrast, and now you're going to see that only that area is going to be changed. Now I don't want to do that because, you know, I have some of the background and some of the rocks, so it looks stupid, right? So I wouldn't want to do that, but that means I can do anything to that area because it's inside my selection. So to deselect, you do Control D on the keyboard. Control D. So if I select something and I want to get and I want to undo that, Control D is for deselect. Control D is for deselect. So I want to select this upper corner and get rid of that. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to start at this top and I'm going to draw all the way around the outside. Photoshop will know that it goes to that edge, and I have to come back and always come back to the start when you draw a selection tool. You have to start at one end and end at the same spot. Now it's selecting this area. If I right click in the middle of this area, I can go down to Fill. Right click and go down to Fill. Now this little box pops up. The default usually for most of the computers we have here is to already have the content aware in the contents right here. If it's not, you use the drop down menu to go to it. Okay, because you can also fill it with black or gray or white, but we want content aware. That means Photoshop's going to try to figure out what you want to replace this with. So we're going to say, okay, now I want you all to watch this upper right-hand corner. Eyes up in this upper right-hand corner and watch what happens. Okay, so it went away, yeah? It filled it, and so it filled it with the color that's there, and it makes it look totally natural. How do I deselect this? Control D to deselect that. So now I have that area gone. So Control minus to make it smaller. So now I've fixed those spots. I've made the color a little bit richer, and I've gotten rid of some of the things I don't want in here. Okay? So let me show you another way to get rid of something you might not want. Let's go to a different picture here. Let's go to one with the bird in it. So that would be this one, I think. Go. Well, I don't know where that went. Okay, so here's my bird right here, and let's say I want to get rid of that bird. So what the content aware fill tool works best when you have an item selected against a background that you want to fill with that background. That's when it works the best. So if I take this little lasso tool and I select around the bird and just come all the way to where it's touching there, and I come up and I start where I did that. I'm going to right click in the middle and go to Fill and go to OK. Now it's going to, now why didn't that work? Anybody know why? Michael? No, I'm on the vibrance layer, not the background layer. So I need to be on the background layer. Okay? So now I'm going to go back in and go to Fill. Okay? And now you see that it filled it in with the ocean behind it and got rid of the bird. Okay? Now, I really like the bird in there, so I don't want to get rid of him, but that's how I would get rid of him. Now, to undo this, remember Control Z or Control Alt Z. If you want to go back a few steps, Control D for deselect. I can also, so that's if I want to use content aware and get rid of something very easy like that. Now, let's say I want to make more birds in here. Or fill it, or let's say first I want to get rid of it and try something different. Let's try filling it with the rubber stamp. And the rubber stamp is about a little less than half the way down on the tool palette. If you hover over it, it says rubber stamp tool. And what it does is it takes information from one area and stamps it over another. It takes information from one area and stamps it over another. So if I click on that, again, you see that I have a brush. Okay? So I'm going to make it fairly small and do this in pieces. So in order to select the area that I want to stamp over him, I want to use it. You see the circle has something in it. It always remembers what you did last time, and that's why that's in there. I hold the Alt key down and it turns into a target. You see that little target now? So it's telling you that that's where it's going to take the information from. So if I hold the Alt key down and then hit the left mouse button, and then I come over here and I click over that, I can now come in and click over the bird and get rid of him. Okay? Make sure it's smaller so I'm getting the colors that are matching there. So I can get rid of the bird. Okay? That's using the clone stamp. It takes something from one area and stamps it over the other. So now let's say that I don't want to do that, or let's say I want to do that, and let's find some stuff I want to get rid of. I don't think there's anything in here though. Let's say I want to get rid of some of these little white spots here. I can do the healing brush or I can use the clone stamp. So if I come over, I want to just get an area that's similar to it and click over it. Over here, this little edge is drawing my attention because it's at the edge of the frame here. So let's say I want to get rid of that. I could clone stamp, make the brush much bigger, and I can take another rock and I can clone that over here. Okay, and get rid of that light area. But now you see that it looks like that rock. So this is one way how people always can tell when something's been clone stamped, because they see that it looks like duplicates all the way throughout. But that's one way to get rid of stuff. I don't want you ever to use it to get rid of a large area, because almost always we can tell. Almost always we can tell. But the other fun thing about a clone stamp is this. You can come over and you can duplicate and put more things anywhere you want them. So I could come over and do that. Okay? To put a whole bunch of birds in there. Now, the clone stamp, you want it to be, the hardness of your brush to be soft as it can go. Because if it's hard, let me show you what happens. If it's hard and I select this bird, and I go and click on them, and I put them over here, then I have a circle around them. You see how it doesn't look like it blends in? So I don't want to do that. I want to use the brush when I'm clone stamping. I want to use a soft brush. A soft brush. Okay? A soft brush, always. So I could even, if I wanted, just come in and make them have 2 heads. So I can come and make my brush smaller. Actually, let's make them have a couple beaks. Okay? So I'm going to just grab that, and I can make them have like 3 beaks. And make them have a bunch of different eyes. Okay? So it's a fun thing to play with, but you use it to get rid of things that you can't get rid of with your healing brush, because the healing brush only gets rid of little small areas, not really large areas. Because if you try to use it on a large area, it doesn't work. Okay? So that's those. Now, the other one I want to talk about is called the Shadows and Highlights tool. And what the Shadows and Highlights tool does, you want to do it before you do anything else, because you can't use a layer adjustment for that. For some reason, it's not in Photoshop. So if I come over to the Layers palette and I look at all this to add a layer in here, there is no Shadows and Highlights. But if I come up here to Image, Adjustments, you'll see that almost always, almost all of these things are the same that are in my Layers palette. See all these brightness, contrast levels, curves. If I come over here, it's very similar. Brightness, contrast levels, curves, etc. Very similar, except for a couple of them. And one of them is Shadows and Highlights. That's near the bottom here. See where it says Shadows and Highlights? So if you have a picture that you take in the sun where it has dark shadows and really strong highlights, highlights are light areas, you can come up here and you can fix them. Now, the default on this is that it automatically will lighten the shadows 35%. So you see how much lighter this got here? So if we come down and I show you all the options, I can turn that on and off. So you can see how much different it made those shadows, yes? But I don't really want to make them that light. So I'm going to come down all the way to the left, and that's the picture that is just how I took it. If I want to lighten up the shadows, I just take that slider over a little, not very much, and I'm going to lighten up that shadow area just a little bit and lighten up the shadow areas in the clouds also. And I can move it to where I think it looks kind of cool to get a little detail in there. So if we look at the before and after, we just got a little bit more detail in the shadow areas. Now I also want to get more detail in the highlight areas, which is this area. So I'm going to move that slider over and get a little bit of detail in there that we didn't have before. So it equals out a little. It equals it out a little bit. What happened here now is it looks kind of flat and weird looking, right? So in order to fix that, and if you want to put that on its own layer, what would you do to this background to have shadows and highlights on its own layer? Duplicate that background, right? And then you could call it shadows and highlights if you want. But now let's go in and make a layer that says brightness and contrast. So I can come in here now and I can take this contrast up, because that's one of the issues that happens with the shadows and highlights is we lose some contrast. But so if I do this, you can see that I still have a really cool picture, but I've got more detail in the shadows than I had here. Okay, we have more detail in there, and we add a little contrast. We get detail in both the highlights and the shadow areas. The shadow and highlights area tool should be used very judiciously because of the fact that you can't that it'll look really wacky and weird if you overdo it, and you don't want that. You only use it when it's on a bright sunny day and you have very harsh shadows and very strong highlights, in order to equal out the lighting a little bit. Okay? And that it's great for evening it out just a little bit and making the picture a little bit better. So that's shadows and highlights, the healing brush, the clone stamp, the content aware fill, and the vibrance and saturation. So we can really improve a picture from what we started with, right? So if we go to history, and what we started with is here. And then if we go back down to where we are here, it's a huge difference in that picture, isn't it? We're making it a lot better. And that's what we want to do with each picture that we're working on.